The Ottawa County Board of Commissioners meeting for Tuesday, August the 23rd. Today's invocation. Ottawa County seeks to be a welcoming place where you belong, recognizing that we are a county of many different faiths and traditions. Our invocation today is offered from one of those perspectives. I will now ask Commissioner Bergman to introduce today's invocation guest.
Thank you. Our invocation today is offered by Father Jared Kramer, the rector at St. John's Episcopal Church. And I believe he has an assistant here by the name of Lucy.
Thank you so much. Thanks for this cup.
Absolutely.
Where you belong. In our church, we have something called the baptismal covenant, where we promise to respect the dignity of every human being, make sure every human being knows they are valued in the eyes of God, and I think in the eyes of our community is what we hope for. This is one of the most meaningful parts of Ottawa County to me, where you belong. We don't know who's going to occupy these seats in a few months, but I hope they share this value. Because some of the things that I've heard about boys being boys and girls being girls, I work with kids who are on the gender identity spectrum at the highest risk of suicidality, that don't feel like they belong in Ottawa County. I work in migrant camps doing vaccine equity work. I've seen the work our Department of Health does, saving lives, showing our migrant workers that we're grateful for the work they do, because they don't always feel like they belong in this county. And it wasn't that long ago that we all stood in the other room with hundreds of people angry about refugees, despite the fact that every single faith leader who got up spoke in favor of refugees and what they do, no matter our political views. So refugees sometimes don't feel like they belong here either. I don't know who's going to occupy these seats in a few months, but whoever does, I hope they think very carefully about who we are as the people of Ottawa County, who our God calls us to be, so that all truly belong. Let us pray. O Lord, our governor, bless the leaders of our land, that we may be a people at peace among ourselves and a blessing to other nations of the earth. To the president and members of the cabinet, to governors of states, mayors of cities, and to all in administrative authority, grant wisdom and exercise and grace in the exercise of their duties. To senators and representatives, and to those who make laws in our states, cities, towns, and our county commissioners, give wisdom, courage, and foresight to provide for the needs of all people, so that we might fulfill our obligations in the community of this world. To judges and officers of our courts, give understanding and integrity, that human rights may be safeguarded and justice served. And finally, teach our people to rely on your strength and to accept their responsibilities to their fellow citizens, that they may elect trustworthy leaders and make wise decisions for the well-being of our society, that we may serve you faithfully in our generation and honor your holy name. And Almighty God, to whom we must account for all our powers and privileges, guide the people of Ottawa County in the election of officials and representatives, that by faithful administration and wise laws, the rights of all may be protected and our nation be enabled to fulfill your purposes through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Lucy, do you want to say a prayer too? You good? Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Will you all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Will you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Garcia. Here. Mr. Baumann.
Here.
Mr. Zylstra.
Here.
Mr. Dannenberg.
Here.
Mr. Meppeling.
Here.
Mr. Terpstra.
Yes.
Mr. Holtboer.
Yes.
Mr. DeYoung. Mr. Kyers.
Here.
Mr. Bergman.
Here.
And Mr. Fenske.
Here.
Mr. Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Any presentations or petitions, communications from your office?
None from us.
Thank you. My board chair comments for August 23rd are as follows. Ottawa County and the organization Strengthen Youth and Families collaborates to identify and bridge the gaps in services to ensure every child in Ottawa County has access to the supports and services they need. This includes mental health. More information can be found at the website stigma-free Ottawa at miottawa.org. Next, the Ottawa County Water Quality Forum will be held at the Riverside Park in Ottawa County. Save the date, November the 7th, if you are interested in attending. And finally, hunting season is coming up. So hunting is an important part of our managing of our natural lands in Ottawa County. Ottawa County Parks and Recreation offers hunting on over 3,300 acres of selected properties. Deer do not have a natural check and balance in this area needed to prevent overpopulation. Hunters are needed to reduce the population of deer in some of our Ottawa County parks. 6 of the properties require a special permit, which are available via lottery. If you are a hunter and interested in applying for a permit using the lottery, please visit the Parks Department website. Applications are available through August 31st. Next is our public comment portion of our meeting. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. And hopefully you've given your name to Mr. Robach, or if there's others in the audience that want to participate, please give your name, your address, and limit your comments, please.
Mr. Chair, we do have one public comment at this time from Harvey Nickel, Georgetown Township.
Hi, Harvey.
My name is Harvey Nickel. I live in Janison. Have you watched the movie 2000 Mules yet? If not, you need to do so. It is available on Rumble, and it will be shown tonight at the Lighthouse Baptist Church in Holland. Numerous fraudulent ballots were stuffed into drop boxes by mules in order to steal the 2020 election. This fraud is possible because of the inaccurate and inflated voter rolls. Research for yourself the increase in the registered voters in Michigan since Benson became Secretary of State. I finally gained access to the Ottawa County QVF, or Qualified Voter Files, from December of 2020. In this file, there are 193 people over 90 years old who never voted in 2012, 14, 16, or 18, but they voted absentee ballot in 2020. That sounds very fishy, doesn't it? I believe that these are some of the names used for the fake ballots that the mules stuffed into the drop boxes. Each of these people should be asked if they actually did vote. However, 15 have since died, some within a few months after the November 2020 election. 56 people had old addresses listed in QVF and had moved prior to the election. 40 people had no addresses that matched the address on the QVF. 8 people are not residents of Ottawa County. 5 people are not even Michigan residents. And there are 4 people that I could not find in any database that I searched. What is really suspicious is that of these 193 people, 66 were registered in 2020, many of them in September and October. 44 were registered in 2019 and 34 were registered in 2018. Why haven't our sheriff's departments, county prosecutors, county clerks, legislators, and other elected officials investigated this? This warrants a full investigation of the people responsible for this fraud, and they need to be arrested and held accountable. Elections have consequences, and our country is experiencing the result of the fraudulent election where politicians were selected instead of elected. We must clean up our voter files and stop using the George Soros-funded Electronic Registration Information Center, or ERIC. We must get rid of all drop boxes and go back to one-day voting and use only absentee ballots for the military and the disabled. We must require voter ID, and we need to get rid of all machines and only use trackable paper ballots. Here's a printed QVF file that I just printed out, and I have the file in this jump drive for you to transfer to for your information. I've also the VAERS report that you will see, since the media and the health departments are silent about these adverse effects of the COVID shot. Note, there are over 30,000 shot-related deaths. Never think it is normal for healthy young football players and coaches to suddenly die of heart attacks, or for young girls in high school to have strokes.
Thank you, Harvey.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
You know, so ask yourself,
Next
what has
public comment
changed in
we have
2021?
Is
with
Lori
all these events?
Grassman from Robinson Township.
Welcome, Lori.
Hi, Lori Grassman from Robinson Township. A day late and a dollar short, or something like that. Quote, what will Ottawa County not do? Ottawa County will not disparage or demean any disability, gender, race, ethnicity, or culture. Interesting, considering the DEI office spent $52,500 on customized training system for multi-training systems, the same company that states we cannot come together if we do not recognize our differences first. These differences are best articulated when women of color occupy the center of the discourse, while white women remain silent. Actively listen and do not reinforce supremacy by inserting themselves into the middle of the discussion. That is demeaning. Not only to white women, but to everyone. Everyone has a voice and everyone should be able to use that voice. Even the summary of the request sounds demeaning in an effort to better educate the public, like we're not smart enough to understand. And why wait 4 years to educate us? These seats don't belong to big corporations or nonprofits. These seats belong to the citizens of Ottawa County. You didn't ask for input when creating the DEI office, and you neglected to educate us then. Every voter has a chance to have their votes heard. Some chose not to. Those that voted made their voice heard, and it was loud and clear. No more DEI. You can't make it about Miss Africh. It's never been about her. She's probably a very nice woman. It's about the divisiveness of DEI, the programs that DEI brings in. DEI puts people into a hierarchy of categories. No one should be put into a category. No one should be looked at for their skin color or gender. I'm so much more than those things. Everyone is so much more than those things. When my hubby showed up on your job site this week, no one asked for his color or gender. That's not what happens in the real world. He was hired because of your need and his quality. Out there, quality and character matter, not race and gender. If you truly believe the statement, we all belong, you would have gotten rid of the DEI office. You would have realized that it was dividing our county, but instead you expanded the divide. And no one should have to sit silent. No race, no gender, no sex. Every voice should have a chance to be heard and be part of the process. There are about 300,000 voices here in Ottawa County, and not one is more important than another. A big corporation is not more important than a small family business. A person from Holland is not more important than a person from Marne. And your county road worker filling potholes is not more important than you sitting there. It doesn't matter what category you're in. It's time to listen to those that voted and stop slamming people into social categories. We understand what DEI is. We didn't need it before 2018, and we don't need it now. We don't need to be educated. We get it. We cared to show up to the meetings, and we cared enough to show up to vote. No statement needed. Thank you.
Next public comment is David Lee from Holland Township.
Welcome, David.
Thank you. Good afternoon to the Board of Commissioners. Thank you for your service. That's something I actually failed to mention, is how much I appreciate all the work that you have put in over the years, some of you for many years. So thank you. As a resident of Holland Township, I just want to tell you who I am and why I'm here. I moved here back in 2014. I graduated from Fiscal college, and I want to feel like I belong here. When the DE&I office was created, it helped me decide to stay in this area. It's a great thing to be wanted. It's a great thing to be cared for. It's a great thing to be thought of. I think in this instance, myself as an immigrant, I came here to the United States when I was 6 years old, became a naturalized citizen about 10 years later. It was refreshing to know that even in Ottawa County, we can have a group of people and enough policies in place to say, as a county, as a unit of government, we want to be inclusive. We don't want to be divisive. We want to make sure that what we're doing makes sense for all the people that are here. Ottawa County is an extremely diverse place. As some of you may already know, Ottawa County is one of the fastest growing counties in the state. And since 2014, approximately 17% of all the population growth in the county has been attributed to immigrants. That's substantial. We would not have actually gotten to that point where we are one of the fastest growing counties in the state without the presence of immigrants feeling safe enough, welcome enough, and hopeful enough to find their homes here. When I look forward to the future, I hope that we can continue to welcome people like me that are educated, that care about the community, that are willing to serve and speak up. The alternative is far worse. You can see it in other places around the country, countries that choose to step away from being intentionally equitable or inclusive, that become more homogeneous, more inequitable, where injustice is allowed to run free. This is really hard. Inclusivity, equity, these are really hard concepts. 3 minutes is certainly not long enough for me to explain fully what they really mean, but the fact that the county has taken a position, and I hope will continue to say that this is important, means a lot. I believe in the power of symbols. Perhaps the office of DEI is nothing more than a symbol, but that alone is a statement. I know it's a choice that we make as voters, what we put into power, and how we build a better future. Thank you for courage, and thank you.
Thank you, David.
Next public comment is from David Barnowski, Port Shelby Township.
Welcome, Dave.
Hello again. I rise to come back up and support again the health department. They've got a budget request in today, and there's also an agreement I'm hoping you will approve. I'm also playfully thinking that you should make sure that all of your end of year party budgets and awards banquets budgets are well funded this year, because you're losing some people that are very good. So I support the health department every time I've ever risen here, I have. I'm also rising to support the Department of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I'm not going to refute everything that was said against it, but everything I hear ever said against it seems to rise from what looks like a misunderstanding to me. And I remember listening to the multiple people who've come in here and given you presentations about why it's important to them. And those were people who were recruiting for businesses to come here because the DEI makes it easy for them to bring people here to fulfill the needs that they bring with them. So I support that. I support the resolution, or the, the statement on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I wish the people who disagreed had the same understanding of it that I do, if I'm right, or could show me where I'm wrong if I am, but I don't think I am. So that's who I support, and thank you. Oh, and as usual, Harvey Nichols wrong about everything.
Those are all of the registered public comments we have, Mr. Chair.
Is there anyone else in the audience at this time that would like to make public comment? There's a second opportunity for public comment towards the end of our meeting. This time, since we have a rather full agenda, we'll look for a motion for approval of today's agenda.
Second.
There's a motion and support. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, will you call the roll, please, Mr. Clerk?
Yes, sir. Mr. Kyers.
Yes.
Mr. Holtlower.
Yes.
Mr. Garcia.
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberg.
Yes.
Mr. Zylstra.
Yes.
Mr. Terpstra.
Yes.
Mr. Meplin.
Yes.
Mr. Baumann.
Yes.
Mr. Bergman.
Yes.
And Mr. Fenske.
Yes,
Motion passes.
thank you. Next is our consent resolutions, Commissioner Dannenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make a motion that we approve consent resolutions 1 through 3.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, will you call the roll, please?
Sir, Mr. Garcia.
Yes.
Mr. Bergman.
Yes.
Mr. Zylstra.
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberg.
Yes.
Mr. Terpstra.
Yes.
Mr. Meplin.
Yes.
Mr. Holtlower.
Yes.
Mr. Baumann.
Yes.
Mr. Kyers.
Yes.
And Mr. Fenske.
Yes.
Motion passes.
We have no public hearings. To start out, our action items from planning and policy, Commissioner Kyers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The first action item from planning and policy is a retirement policy, and this is the first reading. And the motion is to approve and revise retirement policy for review and comment.
We have a motion and a support. Is there anything you'd like to reference?
This is just really a cleanup of what we're currently doing right now. This policy had not been reviewed in some time, so the revisions in here currently reflect how we handle our retirement policy, that employees hired before 2013 or 2012, depending on their group, are in a defined benefit program, and those hired after that date are in a defined contribution plan.
Okay. Gentlemen, any further discussion? Seeing none, will you call the roll, please?
Sir, Mr. Dannenberg,
Yes.
Mr. Baumann,
Yes.
Mr. Bergman,
Yes.
Mr. Meppelink,
Yes.
Mr. Terpstra,
Yes.
Mr. Garcia,
Yes.
Mr. Hopeflord,
Yes.
Mr. Zylstra.
Yes.
Mr. Kyers
Yes.
and Mr. Fenske.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Number 2 is the Ottawa County Statement on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and the motion is to approve the Ottawa County Statement on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion.
Second.
There's a motion on the floor and a second. I know that this was a long time coming and took a lot of effort and time on the part of this board to put this statement together. Is there any further discussion on this? Seeing none, will you call the roll, please?
Sir, Mr. Kyers,
Yes.
Mr. Hopeflord,
Yes.
Mr. Meppelink,
Yes.
Mr. Terpstra,
No.
Mr. Garcia,
Yes.
Mr. Zylstra,
Yes.
Mr. Bergman,
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberg,
Yes.
Mr. Baumann,
Yes.
and Mr. Fenske.
Yes,
Motion passes.
thank you. Next, from Finance and Administration. Take a deep breath, Commissioner Baumann. You have a lot of work.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In regards to the public health personnel request, I make a motion to approve the request from public health to add 1.6 full-time equivalent grant coordinator at a cost of $61,389 to be paid for by the Michigan Public Health Institute grant.
Second.
Motion by Baumann, second by Bergman. Is there any discussion, gentlemen? Will you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Bergman,
Yes.
Mr. Zylstra.
Yes.
Mr. Kyers,
Yes.
Mr. Garcia,
Yes.
Mr. Hopeflord,
Yes.
Mr. Baumann,
Yes.
Mr. Meppelink,
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberg,
Yes.
Mr. Terpstra,
Yes.
and Mr. Fenske.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Regarding the Ottawa area ISD work-based learning program, I make a motion to approve and authorize the board chairperson and clerk register to sign the agreement to add 8 work-based learning student positions at a total cost of $3,840 for fiscal year 2022 and $80,000 to be included in the fiscal year 2023 budget request.
Or.
There's a motion and support. Mr. Shea.
Yeah, Zach up here from HR can explain this pilot program, but it's really to develop a pipeline of potential new employees to work for the county and to consider the county as a future career.
Yes, thank you, John. I'm Zach, the Assistant HR Director. We're always looking in HR for different partnerships and talent pipelines that we can create in order to make sure that our organization can be staffed appropriately. And so this is a great partnership with the ISD in the area. Students are either in a capstone or a co-op program where they can come on site and we'll pay them like regular employees and they'll work right alongside one of our employees while they learn. In addition, we do get work out of them. So that is, it'll be a great partnership. We can teach them about the county, how to be a successful employee, not only to work in Ottawa County, Michigan, but also hopefully us as an organization in the future. So today's request is to ask for a few positions. The student positions that we'll pay with vacancy funds for this current fiscal year, and then we'll include 8 positions in the fiscal year 23 budget.
Questions, gentlemen?
Yeah, I have a quick question. Zach, these 8 positions, are these students that already have expressed an interest in a certain field? Because I noticed that 4 of them might be working in the sheriff's department. Have they expressed interest, like going into the law field or something like that?
Yeah, exactly. So their program coordinator there reaches out to us, says, hey, I have a student interested and being an electrician. Of course, we pair them with our facilities maintenance department. We are dedicating 4 towards the sheriff's office so that we can be nimble with our funding and keep 4 within their budget, and then 4 will be under the HR budget, which will then charge back to the department. So we're trying to be as nimble as possible, not knowing where students' interests will be at the beginning of the year, but then moving it under the correct department in the end.
Okay.
Mr. Sheriff, some future cadets? Any other questions for Zach, gentlemen? Hey, thank you. We have a motion and a second. Will you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Zylstra.
Yes.
Mr. Bergman.
Yes.
Mr. Baumann.
Yes.
Mr. Kyers.
Yes.
Mr. Garcia.
Yes.
Mr. Meppelink.
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberg.
Yes.
Mr. Holtlor.
Yes.
Mr. Terpstra.
Yes.
And Mr. Fenske.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Regarding the delegates for the MERS annual meeting, I make a motion to approve and authorize the board chairperson to sign the form nominating Zachary Van Alsdale as officer delegate and Dean Crum as employee delegate to the 2022 MERS annual meeting.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. I think, John, this is done every year.
Correct. Yep.
For a
It's
representation on the MERS.
the annual MERS meeting, and they can vote on board members at MERS. They learn any updates that are going on with the MERS retirement system.
And the employees were the ones that nominated and voted for these 2 delegates,
And
correct?
we don't do that.
Okay. Mr. Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Baumann.
Yes.
Mr. Garcia.
Yes.
Mr. Meppelink.
Yes.
Mr. Holtlor.
Yes.
Mr. Zylstra.
Yes.
Mr. Terpstra.
Yes.
Mr. Kyers.
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberg.
Yes.
Mr. Bergman.
Yes.
And Mr. Fenske.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Regarding the agreement for veteran services dated November 12, 2019, addendum number 1, I make a motion to approve and authorize the board chairperson and clerk register to sign addendum number 1 of the agreement for veteran services dated November 12, 2019. Support.
We have a motion and a support. Would you like to, is this the one that's adding a position?
Yeah, so this would add a 4th veteran service counselor position to our Veterans Office, contingent on us receiving grant funding from the Michigan Veterans Affairs Agency. So this would amend our current agreement to provide veteran service by adding an additional just over $2,400 cost to provide that 4th veterans service counselor between October 1st and December 31st of this year. If we don't get the grant, then we would not bring on this 4th
I see.
position.
Okay. Any questions, discussion, gentlemen? Seeing none, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Terpstra.
Yes.
Mr. Holtlor.
Yes.
Mr. Zylstra.
Yes.
Mr. Kyers.
Yes.
Mr. Meppelink.
Yes.
Mr. Baumann.
Yes.
Mr. Bergman.
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberg.
Yes.
Mr. Garcia.
Yes.
And Mr. Fenske.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Regarding the purchase service agreement with Hope Network, addendum number 1, I make a motion to approve and authorize the board chairperson and clerk register to sign the addendum number 1 to the purchase service agreement between the County of Ottawa and Hope Network, West Michigan, to provide transportation services to Ottawa County veterans.
There's a motion and support. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Kyers.
Yes.
Mr. Holtlor.
Yes.
Mr. Garcia.
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberg.
Yes.
Mr. Zylstra.
Yes.
Mr. Terpstra.
Yes.
Mr. Meppelink.
Yes.
Mr. Baumann.
Yes.
Mr. Bergman.
Yes.
And Mr. Fenske.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Regarding the 3-year agreement for veteran services, I make a motion to approve and authorize the board chairperson and clerk register to sign the agreement for veteran services between the County of Ottawa and Social Services Resources LLC to begin January 1, 2023 and end December 31st, 2025.
Motion was made, support. I think there was almost a tie, but I think McBoy beat you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Garcia,
Yes.
Mr. Bergman,
Yes.
Mr. Zylstra,
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberg,
Yes.
Mr. Terpstra,
Yes.
Mr. Meppelink,
Yes.
Mr. Holtvluwer,
Yes.
Mr. Baumann,
Yes.
Mr. Kyers,
Yes.
and Mr. Fenske.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Regarding the agreement for veteran services dated August 23, 2022, addendum number 1, I make a motion to approve and authorize the board chairperson and clerk register to sign the addendum number 1 of the agreement for veteran services dated August 23, 2022.
Second.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Dannenberg,
Yes.
Mr. Baumann,
Yes.
Mr. Bergman,
Yes.
Mr. Meppelink,
Yes.
Mr. Terpstra,
Yes.
Mr. Garcia,
Yes.
Mr. Holtvluwer,
Yes.
Mr. Zylstra,
Yes.
Mr. Kyers,
Yes.
and Mr. Fenske.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Regarding the ARPA funding public survey results, I make a motion to receive for information the results of the public survey regarding ARPA funding.
Second.
Motion and a second. If people would like to find the survey results, where would they specifically
I'll
go
let
to?
Paul Sachs come up and give a summary and we can provide the answer to that. But we will obviously make the results of that survey public, but we had about 2,300 respondents to the survey, and they were asked to rank our categories of buckets of how we would look to spend those funds. And I think some of the requests for that funding that you'll see later in the agenda reflect some of the priorities that were expressed in that public survey.
Thanks, John.
I think we have about 5 of these ARPA motions right here in order. So I don't know if you want to take them as a group or individually. Maybe we can, you might as well just stay up here for a bit.
Yeah, probably individually, because there may be some other people that may want to say a couple words on those.
Yes, right. There are some other people here.
Thank you. And to answer your question, Mr. Chair, I think we can easily put these survey results up on the ARPA website via the county homepage, and there'll be a link to them.
Great.
Easy enough. So the overview, as you're aware, the ARPA task force requested that this survey be released to the public to solicit some input on how the community felt about the initial priorities that were identified. And as you know, that ARPA task force is comprised of over 20 individuals representing multiple industry sectors, private, academic, nonprofit, government agencies, and others. And each of those individuals are put together on this task force because they have a good pulse on community needs, and they have their ear on the ground, if you will, on what those most important issues are at the current time and what could be done with these dollars focused on those priority areas moving forward. So the priority areas that we had the public identify and rank, if you will, were affordable housing, social human service needs, countywide broadband, and business stabilization. And as you can see on the first page of the summary report of these results, affordable housing strongly at the top, with almost 70% of respondents identifying that as the most important, followed by social and human service needs. The rest of the pages summarize kind of subcategory questions that we asked within each of those buckets. As the task force started to think about these priority areas, what specifically are those needs within there that those groups of individuals were recognizing are the most important. So for instance, I won't cover every one of these, but if you look at housing, the 2 subcategory questions that we asked talked about how important is it to a resident that we dedicate some effort to support affordable housing for the workforce? And nearly 80% of respondents indicated either very important or important in that category. We also had another question under that affordable housing bucket, because it's not just housing stock that's important to create that, but also helping to ensure housing stability for those that already have homes and to ensure they can stay in their homes. And we had positive results received from that as well, where the respondents, over 2,100, indicated important, one or two, about 56% of those respondents identified that need. And then you can go through each of those other priority areas with additional questions that were asked. These survey results, they're viewed as valuable for the ARPA task force and for others and yourselves who are on this table as we start to receive funding requests. How do those requests align with what the task force is identifying? How do they align with public sentiment towards these initial priority areas? If you have any questions, please let me know.
I'll have a quick question. Yes,
Yep.
I noticed that there were a total of 2,200 plus folks who completed the survey.
Correct.
Is that the average number of respondents when we put out a survey like that for a county of 300,000?
That's a good question. We got a really good response rate. I mean, if I don't have, this wasn't a statistical survey.
Right.
Statistically significant survey results with our county population, looking at various quadrants. I mean, you want 500 responses in one quadrant, 500 maybe in another. But overall, about 2,000 responses was really good. We were initially saying, non-scientifically, if we get over 1,000 responses in the 30 days that we have this survey out, it's pretty good. I think we did well. Granted, 5,000 would be great, but 2,200 is helpful.
And I guess I asked the question because I'm assuming that there's not only 2,233 people interested in ARPA funds, that there's a whole bunch of people out there, just that not everyone took the time to come or express their thoughts or answer the survey.
I would expect that. Yeah.
Okay.
Any further questions from Mr. Sack?
Good. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second on the floor for the ARPA funding for information purposes. Survey. Will you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Kyers.
Yes.
Mr. Holtlord.
Yes.
Mr. Meppelling.
Yes.
Mr. Terpstra.
Yes.
Mr. Garcia.
Yes.
Mr. Zylstra.
Yes.
Mr. Bergman.
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberg.
Yes.
Mr. Baumann.
Yes.
And Mr. Fenske.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Regarding the dwelling place ARPA funding request, I make a motion to approve the dwelling places request for $2 million in ARPA grant funding contingent on receiving a MSHDA tax credit by the April 2023 application cycle.
Support.
We have a motion and a support. Is there someone here that wants to talk to us about the dwelling place? There you are.
Afternoon, everybody. My name is Chris Bennett. I'm the Director of Housing and Community Development at a dwelling place Grand Rapids. This project specifically, this is the culmination of years worth of work between my organization and two of the oldest churches in the city of Holland, Hope Church and First United Methodist. We were approached by both churches back in 2019. They were looking to come together and make an impact and create additional affordable housing for the city of Holland after watching numerous other attempts basically not get funded through the LIHTC funding process. So this ARPA request is to help us cover the gap between what the low-income housing tax credit dollars can cover in terms of development and the gap that remains after those funds. So the recent increases in both construction costs and a couple of other different factors we're seeing work against our favor in the traditional funding way. So this ARPA opportunity was pretty huge to make sure that we had that gap covered. So
they're requesting $2 million in gap financing on a roughly a $14.3 million project to construct, I think it's 46 units in Holland. And it's contingent on them receiving these low income housing tax credits from MSHDA, the Michigan State Housing Development Authority. There are 2 rounds a year for that, one in October, one in April. So if they don't receive those low income housing tax credits in October, they would apply again in April. If they don't get them in April, then our $2 million grant would go away. And they you would know the details better than me, but they try to get these low income housing tax credits, and they can almost sell those for, I don't know, 80, 90 cents on the dollar, if you will, to help finance the construction of the project.
The tax credits come from the IRS. They're delivered state to state based on population and that kind of thing. And then MISTA is the agency in Michigan that kind of sets what the rules of the game are for the competitive application process. So different things are incentivized, like proximity to downtown, availability of transportation, walk score, and that kind of thing. The other component of that is credit efficiency. So basically, how much are you getting out of the credit that you're asking for? And one thing that this $2 million ask does help with is it increases our competitiveness for that factor alone, because we're essentially able to ask for slightly less amounts of credit to increase our score in hopes that we can reach that threshold of getting the funding secured. And that's correct. If we didn't get funded in October, which is likely, this is incredibly competitive. Out of every application that goes in, maybe a third, less than that, will get funded. We just, sharpen our pencils again and go in for the April round. So
it should be noted too, the City of Holland fully supports this project and has entered into a payment in lieu of taxes agreement with them as well. So there is complete support from the local unit on this.
So are these going to be houses or apartments?
Apartments.
Okay, and then when it's all said and done, who owns the apartments?
Dwelling place.
Okay.
Or a subsidiary organization, but dwelling place, we own it for the property management.
Nonprofit.
Correct.
Is going to own it.
Yep.
Okay, okay.
John, a quick question. I'm assuming that this is a grant and not a loan, right?
Correct.
Yeah, because I noticed on page 83, it has on their sponsored loan, Ottawa Arpa. So I'm just assuming that was.
I asked about that.
We didn't claim,
in the Arpa task force meeting, I asked the same question, but this is a grant, not a loan.
Any other questions? I know that this was voted positively out of the ARPA task force as well as out of our finance committee. Any other questions, gentlemen? Okay. Seeing none, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Bergman,
Yes.
Mr. Zylstra.
Yes.
Mr. Kyers.
Yes.
Mr. Garcia,
Yes.
Mr. Holtvluwer,
Yes.
Mr. Baumann,
Yes.
Mr. Meppelink,
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberg,
Yes.
Mr. Terpstra,
No.
and Mr. Fenske.
Yes,
Motion passes.
thank you.
Regarding the Samaritas ARPA funding request, I make a motion to approve Samaritas's request for 1.5 million in ARPA grant funding contingent upon receiving a MISTA tax credit by the April 2023 application cycle.
Second.
Been a motion and a second. Is there someone from? Okay. Yep.
Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
Joel Lautenbach, Executive Director of Affordable Living Development with Samaritas. This project is similar in character to the Dwelling Place project. It's pursuing the same resource through the Michigan State Housing Development Authority. It seeks to create affordable housing that will be in place at affordable rents set through MISTA requirements for 45 years in the village of Spring Lake. It has a lot of support locally. It's going to be built on land that's being sold to the project by the Presbyterian Church of Spring Lake. They've been looking to develop affordable housing next to their property for some time. And there's been a group of people locally that have been looking for opportunities to develop affordable housing for Spring Lake for about 5 years. And so this project is a culmination of that. By allocating this resource to the Dwelling Place project and the Samaritas project, you're leveraging the tax credit resource into Ottawa County. If it's not leveraged here, it will go someplace else. And across the nation, 90% of affordable housing is created using low-income housing tax credits. So this is an important mechanism to create the resource for vulnerable people, and it'll be in place for 45 years of impact. And Samaritas, like Dwelling Place, is a nonprofit provider of affordable housing. And so we'll be happy to be a part of the community long-term. Do you have any questions for me?
How many units were there?
I'm sorry?
Is there like 53 units?
53 units. Yep, it'd be 43 one-bedrooms and 10 two-bedroom units.
Was it my understanding that some concentration would be for affordable living for seniors, perhaps?
Correct. So we'll have an open community, so people of all ages. 8 will be designated for persons with disabilities and special needs. And our community will also be marketed towards people that are elderly. So anyone can live there, but we'll certainly market towards older residents of the community.
Questions, gentlemen?
The Village of Spring Lake also supports it and has done a payment in lieu of taxes at the township and the village level.
Anything else you'd like to add?
No, very similar. This would be a $1.5 million grant on a roughly just over a $15 million project overall.
Yeah, I have a question for John. John, out of the 5 buckets, have we put an X number of dollars into each bucket so that we know that all of the proposals who come in might be able to be funded or not funded? Did we say 20% here, 25% there, or anything like that?
We had a lot of discussion about that at the Arpa Task Force meeting, and we've ultimately not put in a specific number for each bucket, because part of it is we didn't want to artificially handcuff ourselves. And especially since we weren't sure what kind of projects we would be receiving among all the buckets. So the short answer is no, we don't have a set number for each bucket.
Okay, I just wondered because according to the survey, it looks like the highest category out there was affordable housing. So I just wondered if that was going to have a bigger amount in its bucket.
Yeah, and again, we didn't know that when we put the buckets together,
Right.
Obviously the survey results, and so we have chosen to kind of maintain our flexibility there. And we're also, just because of the timelines of these 2 particular affordable housing projects, or why they're hitting you first, we have an application process out for the other buckets that are due September 30th, and we'll have a much better idea at that point for this first round of funding as to, which bucket is being requested the most at that point.
Okay.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Zylstra.
Yes.
Mr. Bergman.
Yes.
Mr. Baumann.
Yes.
Mr. Kyers.
Yes.
Mr. Garcia.
Yes.
Mr. Meppling.
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberg.
Yes.
Mr. Holbrook.
Yes.
Mr. Terpstra.
Yes.
And Mr. Fenske.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Regarding the broadband infrastructure, pre-engineering design and pro forma, make a motion to approve $46,964.77 in ARPA funding to hire Gray Bar Inc. to commence with pre-engineering of a middle mile broadband infrastructure network and the preparation of a network pro forma for the county's underserved and unserved areas.
Second.
There's a motion to support, Mr. Sack.
I'll speak to this briefly. So thanks for considering this request. It is another step in our thoughtful, systematic process of determining how we can best address the unacceptable gaps in broadband access across the county. As you know, our rural areas are certainly challenged with residents there and our agricultural producers not having broadband access. Sure, you all field calls. I field calls nonstop, continuously about this. So this has been a goal of ours for many years to figure this out. And it's an issue of economics. The private sector, they are the ones that deliver internet service. They don't have a business case in the rural areas. So it's really hard, even with the amount of funds that are becoming available through the federal government to support broadband expansion. It's still a really hard business case. Makes it even harder when you're dealing with tax dollars. Fortunately, we've been in a really good, and I would say unique position in Ottawa County where we have experience on public-private partnerships in this communication space. As you know, when we started to have wireless broadband being built across the county starting 20 years ago and 3G became very popular, we had a lot of dead zones. Private sector companies were not building cellular communication towers in those areas that were not densely populated. That's a big concern. Wireless coverage is really important, especially when you think about from a public safety perspective. So we sat down with those providers and said, okay, well, are you going to build in these dead zones? They said no. I said, okay, well, perfect. What if the county built towers in those locations and we own them and maintain them? Would you co-locate your equipment on them? And they said yes. We've been very successful at doing that, where we create this, it's kind of considered the middle mile infrastructure, where we own it, maintain it, providers rent space from us. It's an excellent use of public tax dollars because it creates ongoing revenue that we can reapply for other needs across the county once we pay off those towers. As we think about broadband, it's a similar partnership structure where we're looking at this pre-engineering right now. This is a space that we're at. We've got the data showing where our areas of needs are. We're getting more data on where existing infrastructure is. This pre-engineering request to hire Graybar and Fujitsu is to look to do the high-level pre-engineering of where that middle mile infrastructure should go in those rural areas. Simultaneous with this partnership with Graybar to do this work, we released a request for information about a month ago or 6 weeks ago to internet service providers and others in the telecommunications industry. And we said, this is what Ottawa County is thinking about doing, to create this middle mile infrastructure for the private sector to piggyback on and to then deliver their service, high-speed internet service to residents of need. We got the responses back last week and we had nearly a dozen respondents. And many of those ISPs said, yes, we are interested in this. Let's see what you're talking about. Where are you looking at putting this infrastructure? What does it look like? Where would fiber go? It would be a combination of fiber, probably cell towers as well, with new technologies coming out that's very cost effective for those providers to co-locate on the towers. So at this point, then it's our next stage in the process. Let's look at this pre-engineering. Let's look at the financial pro formas that Graybar will give us. We have that information. Then it's the next step, sitting down with providers, working through the business case for them on how it works to deliver service and then how it works for us. Again, our goal is to look at that revenue model with this infrastructure. We will own it. And the providers are the ones that deliver the service. That's the strongest business case that we have experience in. And I'm grateful that we're continuing to move down this path and look forward to seeing where this goes with your support.
Well, I know that the county is, even when we had an established planning commission, we were looking at broadband and all the different pockets within the county that struggled. Some of the pockets 6 miles from the city of Grand Rapids still without service. The state of Michigan also has done their own study, which kind of contradicted some of the county studies. Will this engineering be able to strengthen our position and leverage the ability to be able to get better broadband services?
Yes, well, I absolutely hope that that is where we can get to with the state. And you're correct, Mr. Chair, that the maps coming from the state and the FCC that identify broadband coverage in the county, it's not accurate. Every county, for the most part, nationally is dealing with the same concerns. So locally, they're being organized by counties, and you have supported this, our community foundations and others, to do our own mapping. Say, this is really what our issues are. As we do this pre-engineering and we're thinking about partnerships with the private sector, that aligns really well with where the state and the federal government is looking at on the best use of these dollars coming through for broadband expansion. Public-private partnerships is a viable model if it's done right. So I remain very optimistic that our path that we're going on is going to be well received. And as we look to assemble and we have our mapping and we have our partners together and we can apply for grant funding through the state and the federal government, that our project will elevate to the top. It's going to be highly competitive to get these dollars. And it sounds like big dollars coming out, nationally for broadband, but when you think about the number of homes across the country that need to be connected, it's really not that big of a number. But we are ahead of the game compared to a lot of other counties on what we're doing, and I think that will bode very well for us.
Gentlemen, questions for Paul?
Paul,
Comment, or go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I got a comment on what Paul's talking about. They really push that at some of the NACO things in the broadband too. What we're doing right here and what these ARPA funds are doing for us is really a step ahead of a lot of other people. And we get this data to the state, it'll really help our chances and really get more money for us. So should be a good way to go. Thanks, Paul.
Yep, thank you, Phil.
Hey, Paul, I was gonna ask, out of the 5 buckets, it seems to me that broadband is the bucket where you can actually put your arms around and be able to have something tangible at the end of the ARPA dollars. Is that what a fair assessment?
I would say that as well.
Okay. If we were to able to write out a blank check number on it, what would it take, in your opinion, to be able to have coverage for all of Ottawa County?
Asking big questions.
Right, and I'm not gonna hold you accountable to it.
That's the $100 million question.
That is a big one. You know, we're not looking to be an internet service provider, so we're not doing that last mile connection. That is on the private sector to deliver their service. When we look at our middle mile infrastructure, I don't know if I want to put a figure on it right now.
Okay.
I mean, it could be between 15 and 60 million, maybe.
Okay. And I guess I'm asking because it seems to me like if we wanted to put a certain number in a certain bucket, that this may be the bucket where we would want, in my opinion, to be able to say that we're gonna put X number of dollars because we're committed to broadband. Just a comment.
Yep.
If not a motion.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Paul?
Paul, isn't it true too, is once you get the results of this, you're gonna have a better idea as to how much money you will need?
Absolutely, we will. That is the goal, is to understand what that dollar figure will be. And we're working with Graybar expeditiously. So I hope to have that number within at least the next 60 days. That will really help us for the bigger picture to answer your question, and then as we pursue grants.
Any further? Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
We have a motion and a second regarding our pre-engineering design for broadband. There's no further discussion. Will you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Baumann.
Yes.
Mr. Garcia.
Yes.
Mr. Meppelink.
Yes.
Mr. Holtvluwer.
Yes.
Mr. Zylstra.
Yes.
Mr. Terpstra.
Yes.
Mr. Kyers.
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberg.
Yes.
Mr. Bergman.
Yes.
And Mr. Fenske.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Regarding the eviction prevention program ARPA funding request, I make a motion to approve the 58 district courts request for $2 million in ARPA grant funding over 3 years to support the Ottawa County eviction prevention program.
Second.
Your motion and a second. You're back up here again?
Yeah, I'll quickly tee up Drew on this one.
Absolutely.
Since our office helps to support the County Housing Commission. And when we reorganized or reestablished the Housing Commission in early 2020, we went through a strategic planning session with those commissioners. And those areas of focus I talked about earlier in the survey, housing stock and housing stability, were talked about really strong as those efforts that the Housing Commission can be a part of to help support moving forward. And in that housing stability space, eviction prevention programming is that one tangible area where we felt there was real opportunity to help residents that are facing evictions. And the courts, 58th District Court, led by Judge Kunal in collaboration with Good Sam, they have been operating an eviction diversion program for the last several years. And that funding came from COVID relief dollars, COVID emergency relief assistance funding. And when we went through the exercise of saying, okay, how do we look at a sustainable model long-term for eviction diversion when this funding runs out, because there's huge value in a program like this, which Drew can speak to more articulately than I can. And we thought we had a 2-year runway to develop the mechanism to build a sustained program. We found out within the last several months that that COVID relief funding actually is ending at the end of September of this year. And that is why this ask is before you now for ARPA dollars to support kind of this gap funding, if you will, for a sustained eviction diversion program, which Drew can speak to. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you all for having me. I'm Drew Pierce, the Executive Director of Good Samaritan Ministries. Proud to be here, proud to be part of this county. Was so amazed by the survey results that a county where over 90% of people were homeowners still prioritized affordable housing stability. That says a lot about the people we serve. Proud of the partners that we work with, particularly the 58th District Court and Judge Knoll to bring this before you, the Ottawa County Housing Commission, and the Department of Strategic Impact, and really grateful for the ARPA Task Force. What a great process that you've put together, and grateful for the feedback that we've been able to get from them and from the county staff and from John, just to really help us to refine this. The court has led prevention programming for years, particularly around mental health treatment court, and has been very successful at it. This is an expansion of that to really focus on those that are at risk of eviction. In our last 2 years of eviction prevention, in particular, we've been able to serve all kinds of people across the county, over 29% of which are the disabled population in this work. So it becomes really important to continue to do that. As Judge Knoll likes to say to us, housing is the foundation of stability in life. Remove or shake that foundation, and so many parts of life begin to crumble. For families with very little margin in our community, it only takes one crisis to send somebody into poverty and homelessness, and we can prevent that from happening. We've seen 2 big trends over the last 2 years that we've been doing this. First, in need, our prevention screenings have gone up. In 2019, they were averaging about 2,500 a year. In the first 10 months of this year, we're at over 4,300. That continues to grow. With the lack of housing stock and the challenges that people are facing, that need continues to grow. At the same time, from 2019 to 2021, the court cases around it have dropped by 30% because we've had the opportunity to intervene in them, to keep it from getting to the courts. The way it's always been done is that there's a non-payment of rent, no matter how small. Right away, a tenant gets an eviction notice. They go to court, they go through court proceedings. They often get evicted, become homeless, and then they start to receive services to get back on their feet. The system has been built that people need to lose almost everything before they can get assistance. The way we've been able to operate the last 2 years is there's a non-payment of rent. We step in. We do tenant landlord mediation, case management, financial support, settlement agreement to get people back on their feet and stably housed. So it's a setback, not a complete crisis. And that's the way it's worked. I'll tell you a very, very quick story that just brings us into real time. Last Thursday, our case management lead came to our director of housing, Laura, and said, we've got a tenant that's in trouble. Do we have any general operating funds we can use? This tenant had a crisis, had an emergency, and fell $900 behind on rent. Right, so they came and they're going to get evicted on September 1. So our case management lead calls the landlord and says, if we can come up with the $900, will you not evict them on September 1? The landlord said, if you come up with the $900 and are going to work with them, I'll even renew the lease. Make sure that they stay here. So we call up the tenant and we start working with the tenant on, do you have some money that you can come up with? You got to own this. This is on you. We're here to help. They came up with $350. We came up with $550, and then we worked out a settlement plan to give them 6 months to pay that back to us. That's the sustainability, that's the sense of ownership. They just needed that margin or time to come up with that money. And then that repayment both gives them a sense of pride and ownership, and also refills that bucket so that we can do this for years to come. The financial impact is huge. We ran the numbers for Ottawa County. It cost about $8,900 to evict somebody in terms of supportive services, shelter, court costs. It costs a landlord about $6,000 to evict somebody between lost rent, court fees, potentially damages. This model is based on about $3,300 to keep somebody from being evicted, and that number is going to decrease as we keep getting ahead of people when they're only a couple weeks behind, not a few months behind. Impact financially will be huge. In the last year, we've been able to help 2,600 people stay housed in Ottawa County through our eviction prevention program. 56% of those are children. One of the worst parts of my day is walking through our lobby, knowing that we have to have a play area and toys because there's so many kids that come in with their families from their car, from the mission, or from the street. We'll be able to, with this sustainable program, help on average about 500 individuals a year stay stably housed for a lot less and a lot less trauma. We've got a budget there for you. One thing that's been added to it, and we brought this to the Finance Committee, some of the great feedback we got from the Arpa Task Force was around the sustainability of this budget. We want a program that is going for many, many years to come. There was some question about the ability to raise private funds. You see them in there in about $350,000 over 3 years. Since that meeting, we've got pledges of $220,000 to support this program for that 3 years. Contingent on the receiving of ARPA funding and the invitation from other foundations like the Grand Haven Area Community Foundation to submit applications to make sure that's covered. The numbers around tenant payback and landlord participation, that's all based on the last 2 years of eviction diversion. What we've seen and what we've done around settlement agreements and repayment. What this does is it gives us in the courts the critical bridge to transition from a relief effort to a permanent sustainable model that will keep people from losing their housing in Ottawa County.
Commissioners, questions?
The last eviction prevention program was run more or less by the federal government.
It was funded by the federal government.
Right, and the federal government said, you can't evict any of your renters. And the renters knew that too. So they said, hey, good, we got a holiday coming. You don't have to pay the rent, and they usually trash the place. At least that's what I heard from some of my landlords, okay, that dealt with it. They were very disappointed in that program. Now, is this program a little different? If they don't want to work with you, could they be evicted then?
If the landlord wanted to still proceed with an eviction?
Okay.
Is that what you're asking?
No,
sir?
I'm asking if the tenant doesn't want to work with you, could he be evicted? Because he's got to have some, she or he got to have some skin in the game too, right?
Yeah, if they don't want to agree to the settlement agreement that we have, then they wouldn't receive the assistance that came with it.
Okay, and then they could be evicted.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and I appreciate the comment. The moratorium for about 9 months or a year of when people can be evicted threw a lot of things off, and that's been lifted for quite some time. So a lot of our what we're working from is what happened post moratorium.
Okay.
But it's a great insight.
Commissioner Garcia?
Yes, I'm full of questions today. What percentage of the families that you use are on a repayment program? Is it 100% of them or?
So the first iteration of eviction diversions, we've been through quite a few as MISTA and the federal government have revised it and changed it, put through different phases. Our first iteration was about 6 months called EDP that we worked with the courts, where the majority of them had a resettlement plan or a payback plan. And I don't have the full data on what that looked like in terms of how much of that came back and such. In the last iteration, the SARA funds that we've used for about the last year and a half, they haven't required a repayment plan. So in a sense, we're going back to what we've used in the EDP and some of what we used with the City of Holland and some of the funding that they have.
And I guess I asked because I guess I see that this $2 million is possibly a long-term, like a bucket of money that you can lend out and it'll come back in a repayment form.
Correct.
so that hopefully that there will always be funds there to be able to support families?
Yeah, the sustainability plan of it is completely dependent upon that, both within private funding that we secure, and we get, and that's a lot of what we do. That's what we do as a nonprofit. But to your point, it's very important from the sustainability that those buckets keep getting refilled so that the program can help 500 families a year for 20 years, 30 years and beyond. And on the other side of that, what we're finding is, and it bleeds into all the work we do as we house the homeless. It's a pure strength-based approach. It's not about a handout. Our role and the role of our case management team is to empower people and to help them feel the responsibility and make the plans to right size whatever has gone off kilter in it.
Okay.
So it is, and that's the beauty of it.
Any further questions?
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to make a comment about the ARPA task force and how proud I am and thankful for the hours and hours that they have put into making these things happen today. Holly and Ryan back there, Karen, Paul, especially Paul for his leadership, and John certainly as well. The hours that have been put into the ARPA task force and getting to the point where we are today with the last things that we voted on. I am proud to have been a part of that. And as Mr. Chairman knows, it's been a lot of work by a lot of people who have volunteered a lot of hours. So I want to publicly thank them all for the work that they've done as well.
Thank you, Commissioner. Very true. We have a motion on the floor and a second. If there's no further discussion, will you call a roll, Mr. Clerk?
Yes, sir. Mr. Kyers,
Yes.
Mr. Holtvluwer,
Yes.
Mr. Garcia,
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberg,
Yes.
Mr. Zylstra.
Yes.
Mr. Terpstra,
No.
Mr. Meppelink,
Yes.
Mr. Baumann,
Yes.
Mr. Bergman,
Yes.
and Mr. Fenske.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Regarding the retirement agreement for Ottawa County Health Officer contract, I make a motion to approve and authorize the board chairperson and clerk register to sign the retirement agreement for the Ottawa County Health Officer.
Support.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Garcia,
Yes.
Mr. Bergman,
Yes.
Mr. Zylstra.
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberg,
Yes.
Mr. Terpstra,
Yes.
Mr. Meppelink,
Yes.
Mr. Holtvluwer,
Yes.
Mr. Baumann,
Yes.
Mr. Kyers,
Yes.
and Mr. Fenske.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Regarding the 2023 capital improvement plan, I make a motion to approve the 2023 to 2028 capital improvement plan.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Brief summary.
Yeah, and I don't know if Karen's here, but it's really, you have a list of projects that we're proposing to fund actually for next year. So the projects that you see in the 2023 column will be allocated in the 2023 budget as well. The projects that you see for future years are ones that we're planning to do in those years as those funds become available. Some projects, their timing may change a little bit. So for example, the James Street Building A roof and the Fulton Street Grand Haven roof, if we can kind of remembering those roofs versus waiting a few years where we'd have to replace the entire roof, it would cost a lot more. So sometimes we move projects up a little bit. We will in future years, we'll add some columns here to show not only the funding source and the unencumbered balance, but we'll show how much on some of these projects we've already spent to date on the current projects and how much is still remaining on those projects as well, just to provide you with some more information.
Any questions for Administrator Shea?
Mr. Chair. I just want to say thank you to Karen for the draft that you gave us of the cap. Is that going to be in the packet for September, or are we going to use this? Because the encumbered, unencumbered, I didn't quite get it. But really, when you put in those two columns of spent and unspent, it made a lot of sense.
We can put the revised one in the packet for September.
Okay, I don't know what the reaction was to everybody else, but I really like that. And really made a lot of sense to me, so.
If there's no further questions or discussion, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Dannenberg,
Yes.
Mr. Baumann,
Yes.
Mr. Bergman,
Yes.
Mr. Meppelink,
Yes.
Mr. Terpstra,
Yes.
Mr. Garcia,
Yes.
Mr. Holmore,
Yes.
Mr. Zylstra.
Yes.
Mr. Kyers,
Yes.
and Mr. Fenske.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Regarding the fiscal year 2022 budget adjustments, I make a motion to approve the 2022 budget adjustments per the attached schedule.
Support.
There's a motion and support on the floor. Is there any further discussion on the adjustments? Seeing none, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Kyers,
Yes.
Mr. Holmore,
Yes.
Mr. Meppelink,
Yes.
Mr. Terpstra,
Yes.
Mr. Garcia,
Yes.
Mr. Zylstra,
Yes.
Mr. Bergman,
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberg,
Yes.
Mr. Baumann,
Yes.
and Mr. Fenske.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Finally, setting a public hearing for the fiscal year 2023 budget. Make a motion to approve the setting of a public hearing on the fiscal year 2023 Ottawa County budget for Tuesday, September 13, 2022, to be held in the Ottawa County Boardroom, 12220 Fillmore Street, West Olive at 1:30 PM.
Second.
There's a motion and support. Any discussion? Will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Bergman,
Yes.
Mr. Zylstra,
Yes.
Mr. Kyers,
Yes.
Mr. Garcia,
Yes.
Mr. Holmore,
Yes.
Mr. Baumann,
Yes.
Mr. Meppelink,
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberg,
Yes.
Mr. Terpstra,
Yes.
and Mr. Fenske.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Under appointments from the Talent and Recruitment Committee, Commissioner Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In reference to the Community Mental Health Board, I'd like to place into nomination the name of Stephen Savage to fill one primary consumer vacancy beginning immediately and ending March 31st, 2024, I'm sorry.
There's a motion and a support for the Community Mental Health Board. Is there any discussion? Will you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Zylstra,
Yes.
Mr. Bergman,
Yes.
Mr. Baumann,
Yes.
Mr. Kyers,
Yes.
Mr. Garcia,
Yes.
Mr. Meppelink,
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberg,
Yes.
Mr. Holmore,
Yes.
Mr. Terpstra,
Yes.
and Mr. Fenske.
Yes.
The motion passes.
In reference to the Community Corrections Advisory Board, I'd like to place into nomination the names of Linda Hoffman and Kelly Beatty to select one to fill general public vacancy beginning immediately and ending December 31st, 2022.
Support. There's a motion and support. Commissioner Garcia, I see that the committee recommended.
Yes, the interview committee, even though both candidates were excellent, the board or the interview committee is recommending Linda Hoffman at this point.
Okay. Why don't we do a name roll call on this?
Absolutely. Mr. Terpstra,
Linda.
Mr. Holmore,
Linda.
Mr. Zylstra,
Linda Haveman.
Mr. Kyers,
Linda Hoffman.
Mr. Meppelink,
Linda Hoffman.
Mr. Baumann,
Linda Hoffman.
Mr. Bergman,
Linda Hoffman.
Mr. Dannenberg,
Linda Haveman.
Mr. Garcia,
Linda Hoffman.
and Mr. Fenske.
Linda Hoffman.
And Linda Hoffman has received the requisite number of votes.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Discussion items, none. Report of the county administrator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a few updates. Family Justice Center, they finished pouring the first wall today on the Family Justice Center, and they'll do some more walls next week. They're excavating the retention ponds behind the construction trailer on the west pond, and the east pond will be done next week. The parking lots are all up to grade, and they'll remain at that grade until the base coat of asphalt can go down in the fall. We did have found out that the groundwater or the water table was 3 feet higher than what the soil boring showed. So we've had to add some dewatering there in order to pour the footings there as well. If you recall, we were remodeling the CMH administrative offices. The staff have moved back in, and we're just doing some kind of punch list items. There's a back order on the flooring in the break room there, and also waiting to receive the blinds to install in the windows. We did replace the carpet on the 3rd floor at the Grand Haven Courthouse, so that was much needed. We're in the process of replacing the boiler stack at the Grand Haven Courthouse. Unfortunately, some of the sections of the new stack were damaged in shipping. So we're trying to get a revised date as to when those sections will be replaced. And fingers crossed, we've had quite a bit of rain lately. We haven't had any water leak issues at the Grand Haven Courthouse since they did quite a bit of those repairs. So knock on wood that's going to remain the case. Still working on, Progressive AE is working on drawing up the construction plans to revise or redesign the courthouse security stations at Grand Haven, Hudsonville, and Holland District Courts. And work is still continuing on recladding B building. That project will go through approximately December. And I think the clerk's office got some new flooring recently. So that has taken place there. Been meeting with, again, continuing my meeting with the local units. So in the last couple of weeks, I've met with Robinson Township and Blendon Township, and just to reiterate, they also would confirm that they have areas in those townships that lack broadband coverage there. So that's something that they're looking forward to. Just received notice that technically Muskegon County received a $60 million commitment from the Michigan Economic Development Corporation from their SOAR funding, the Strategic Outreach and Attraction Reserve Fund, for $60 million so that City of Coopersville could run their sewage and connect with the Muskegon County Force Main project. That would also connect Continental Dairy Facility and Fairlight. So this is about a $65 million project, and they've got a commitment from MEDC for 60 million of that, which is a huge deal. So that just got word of that today. So Lakeshore Advantage and Road Commission here have been really instrumental in helping with that process. So we'll continue to provide whatever support we can for that, but that's really good news. We had some second interviews yesterday for the deputy county administrator position, and we're also lining up some additional interviews with candidates. So we're hopeful. I think we're narrowing it down to certain candidates, but we're hopeful we will find the right person for that position, and just trying to balance my impatience with filling it with making sure that we have the right person for the job. But again, we Karen and Val and Marcy and myself have gone through the interview process. They've been really wonderful in terms of how they provide some great feedback on the candidates, and I think we're getting hopefully closer to finding the candidate that will really fit that position really well. So I'll continue to keep you updated on that. And that's all I have. Sure.
Any questions for Mr. Shea?
The administrative rule you sent out like last week or 2 weeks ago, where are we at on those?
The one I sent to you was probably on sponsorships, I think it was.
Yeah, I just remembered it here, but where wasn't that to be like all done, the administrative rules, or is that?
There were certain administrative rules related, I think, to COVID that have, I believe, have expired.
Okay.
But we have other, like, didn't put an expiration date, for example, on this one with if a county department wants to sponsor an event or something like that. I didn't put an expiration date on that because I think we always want to know and make sure that that's an appropriate thing to do. That answers your question.
Any other questions for Mr. Shea? Okay, thank you, sir. General information, comments, and meetings attended, commissioners?
You know, I have a quick one. Next Thursday at 11:30, there will be a ribbon cutting for the new office of West Michigan Works. They'll be over at the West Shore Mall. So I understand it's a nicer location than what they had prior. So I believe everyone is welcome to attend. I know that Commissioner Fensky and myself will be there.
Anything else, gentlemen? Seeing not, we'll move into our second opportunity for public comment. Is there anybody online or wishes to speak to us again? Mr. Nichols? You can speak again. You don't need to give us your name. You know who you are. 3 minutes, please.
Yes, it'll be less than that. Before you accept that I'm wrong, according to what was said, I urge you to take that jump drive and open the file, look at all the birth dates or the years, look at the years, the dates registered, open up to over 250 or 220 links to see these people's and all their previous addresses to see if they match the address on the QVF file. And if you can see that that is wrong, then I guess I am wrong. But if those are true, then I'm going to say I'm true. And I do not appreciate being told that I'm not saying the truth, because as much as I know, I am. Thank you.
Thank you, Harvey. Anyone else like to speak during public comment?
There's currently no one on Zoom, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Well, since we've conducted our business today and there's no further public comment, we'll consider ourselves adjourned.